Hello and welcome back everybody to Path of Exile for my final update on my Herald of Thunder Pathfinder League starter. So this one took me quite some time to finish up, mostly because I had a lot of trouble getting the motivation to farm up for Progenesis. I finally did it after building quite a few other builds, and so here we are. Now I'm pretty pleased with how this build performed overall. It looks very similar to a build I made last league, which is a low-life variant of Herald of Thunder Poison, which is getting converted to chaos damage with Voltaxic Rift, and is using Dragon Fangs and Storm Secrets and Olieses. One thing that is of note, and the reason that I go Pathfinder, is I do not have the Keystone Notable that makes Herald of Thunder the only aura that I can have. I do this because I like to have other auras, and so I've got Petrified Blood, Vitality, Malevolence, and Herald of Agony on this one. Alright, so those are the auras that I'm running, and next I'm going to jump into a Minotaur map, just a white Minotaur, to set a baseline of what's going on with the build. Then we'll do a Screaming Invitation, and then finally we'll run into a Citadel map and show where the build lies on each of those platforms. Now, I will say that while I'm happy with how this build performed when it comes to a league starter, being Herald of Thunder, I'm actually pretty unhappy with how it performed otherwise. For the level of investment, I really wanted to push it further, and while there are certainly things that I could do to make the build tankier, it ends up falling off pretty harsh in damage if you do that, and so I find myself really just not wanting to invest further, because I feel like every step forward I take defensively is a step backwards offensive, which is unfortunate. Right now the build is sitting at somewhere around 12 million post ramp poison, and so that's after 5 to 10 seconds, depending on how long it takes, and that's with the assumption that we're getting to 10 wither stacks, which I think we should be getting higher between Herald of Thunder and Ball Lightning, but 10 I think is a fair standard to set. But yeah, I think the build could benefit a lot from more Fizz taken as, definitely more life overall. That's kind of where it sits. So it does pretty well there, and for most farming situations it does fine. It got all of my Void Stones, but I think where I made a mistake is I tried to take the build a lot further than it really needed to go. I should have let the build go when it satisfied the requirement of getting my Void Stones and just let it be a starter. But I tried to take it into T17s, and it didn't really meet up to that challenge. And so what happened is I ended up getting more annoyed than anything else, which is what led me to become discouraged with the build. Now, I have since made other builds, gotten a lot of perspective, which has been really good for me overall, but this is how we're performing in T17s at this point. Now, T17s are in a state that I hope is changed, because I feel like I went into barrels. But I hope that it's changed. I hope that it's improved and made more accessible overall. But at the same time, I need to understand the limitations of my own build. right? And I think Herald of Thunder has a significant limitation in that you have to make a decision on what you're giving up and what you have to deal with. So, at least in the way I built it, this build just doesn't match up defensively. We'll go one more go, because this is the frustration that really kind of pushed me down in the league, right? Because there are some cool things going on with the build, and I like the way it clears. It just doesn't handle the content here quite well enough. So this character's operating on a few things that is really making it work. Number one, we have our normal Herald of Thunder setup, where we have Herald of Thunder, Elemental Focus, Unbound Ailments, Cruelty, Void Manipulation, and Deadly Ailments, all adding to our poison. We are using Lutula's Hunger to get ourselves a nice amount of life for our Petrified Blood pool. I wish this were higher, but that's a discussion topic for later. And then we are using Olias's Delight to get ourselves a really nice boost in damage, because we are stacking Frenzy charges with Mark on Hit, or the Mark Mastery. So we've got that. We're using Ralakesh Impatience to get us Endurance and Frenzy charges, as well as some Power charges. And after that, it's pretty much defenses. I am using Undar's Clasps because I needed a Temp Chains on Hit and Max Frenzy Charge Corrupt. So I was trying to find one that worked, that didn't have life on it, or didn't have a life mod on it that wouldn't interrupt Ultula's, and this is what I found. And the reason I ended up going with it is because we're low life, it gives us 20% move speed, and I was just like, you know what, that sounds like it'll actually be pretty nice, let's go with that. So one defensive change I could make here is replacing our gloves with almost anything else. And then we've got Voltaxic Rift, which is converting our lightning damage to chaos damage, and finally our quiver, which is pretty much just resistances and move speed. In our flasks, we're using Progenesis. Before that, we were using Aziri's Promise, and we've got Taste of Hate and just a Quicksilver Flask. So again, this build took us all the way through all of our Watchstones and really just started to fall down when it came to T17s, as you've seen. So switching over to POB, let's take a look at what's going on here. So here we have our character, 75, 81, 75, 72. So pretty respectable in the resistance categories. Our suppression is not good. Have any in this version. We can grab some pretty easily, but we have to give up. We either have to level up several times or give up damage in order to get there. I tried it. It didn't feel good, so I ended up switching it back. We've got Frenetic right here. I forgot we're actually getting our Frenzy charges from Way of the Poacher, and that's giving us an additional Frenzy charge, so now we've got 5 total on our character, and it also takes care of our generation. Now, a good way I think to go about this otherwise, and I think what would have made the character much tankier, is if instead of going Way of the Poacher, if we had either skipped out on this and gone for generation on Mark or generation on our quiver, then what we could have done is invested into an Adorned and gotten some % life and % recoup on our jewels, which is what I did last league and I think worked a lot better. So I think if I were to go back and redo this, I would do that, number one. I would go and do Adorned again. Now, moving on to how this is all working. Once we switched over to our Voltaxic Rift, we needed to solve a little bit for poison on hit, and so we did that over here with the tattoos. The rest of that is coming from our Herald of Agony, which is also giving us more poison damage, and then we're using a fair amount of recoup on our jewels, as well as on our tree, to make up for the damage that we're taking. Lastly, we have Elemental Overload, and that's giving us a nice boost in damage because Herald of Thunder crits 5% and hits so often. We can pretty reliably get to Elemental Overload, and that's giving us our 12 million total. Now, if we were to get to our 15 wither stacks, that looks a lot better, and I think and is a much more reasonable place to set that. I'm always low life. So yeah, that's where the build sits. Again, I think if I were to redo this build, I would probably tone back the damage a little bit and go more for Adorned, and make the build a little more defensive in nature. Adorned would let us do a little bit of both, because we could get some dot multi on our Adorned jewels, but we could also do life and recoup, which would help a lot with our survivability. Alright, so as a point of comparison, I wanted to bring up the Herald of Thunder I did last league, and the reason I wanted to bring it up is because this Herald of Thunder traded way more on the side of being tanky than this one did, and a lot of that had to do with the amount of recoup that I ended up getting, as well as the amount of life that I ended up getting. This one was using Adorned at 140 and had a bunch of jewels that were life and recoup jewels, so it ended up being much tankier, as well as being okay on damage. This is after all of the Affliction additions got removed, but it's still got that which was taken, which is a pretty considerable increase to our damage. That being said, overall, even with the damage much lower, I think this build ended up feeling better because it was much better on the survivability side. As you can see, the trees here actually look really similar. This one did end up using Lone Messenger. The damage is actually better than I was showing, but that's one thing that I wanted to try to solve this league, and it didn't end up working out for me. Once more, given the choice between the two of these, I would probably just take the tankier of the two, because I think in the end, even if it was less damage, even if it was slower, it felt much better to play. So yeah, there's some lessons learned about this league's iteration of Herald of Thunder Poison Pathfinder. Sorry again for taking so long to get this update video out. I had a ton of fun building the character, and in a way I'm glad again that I got frustrated with the build, because it encouraged me to try new things and new directions. It also made me realize that in general I prefer a tankier playstyle over more damage. If you want to check out the POB for both this version of my Herald of Thunder Pathfinder and last league's version, I'll put them both in the description below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.